Boston up to Portland, we are over 8 inches above average on rainfall for the year, so we don't need any more, and Lee could certainly bring some. Look how large this storm is. And I want to talk about what's going to be impacting it as we head over the next several days and it makes its way into the Northeast. Right now, it is a Category 3. It is still a big hurricane. Notice how it's looking a little more ragged, though. Bermuda already seeing some of the cloud cover from this, and it's stretching all the way down to the islands as well. But it's propagating those waves out to the East Coast and will continue to do so. We are under a tropical storm warning here in Bermuda. It does look like it'll go just to our west, so hopefully we won't get the worst of it, which is good. But it has a huge wind field. Look at those tropical storm force winds out 200 miles from the center, and you have those hurricane force winds out 100 miles from the center. So even if it doesn't make landfall, the point is you could still get some really squally weather. Right now, we are seeing those winds over 40 miles an hour, and I'm sure at this core, they are obviously much stronger than that because this is a Category 3. Wave heights already, notice, 37 feet, and this thing is going to cause 20 to 40 foot waves as it parallels the entire East Coast. It's starting to make that turn around our ridge, and so it still has a westerly component. It isn't fully going north yet. It still is moving towards the northwest, so it's slowly coming around. And the big question, right, is this trough, and that's what Molly was alluding to. That's bringing our showers into the Northeast. If that moves out of the way, that leaves the door open for this system to get shoved into New England. And right now, it's looking a little more likely, like we could have a landfall of a system in Maine. That is certainly a possibility, but it's also a possibility that it goes a little bit to the east. But it's all going to depend on the systems around it and how it's pushing and pulling it and tugging it. So it's a big system. It's going to experience some shear. It's going to go over cooler water. So you will see those winds start to come down. But just because you're going to see 60-mile-an-hour winds here, you're talking, tropical storm. At this point, is probably going to be considered subtropical or have a different name to it because it'll take on some non-tropical characteristics. Jordan, it is still going to be plenty powerful, and you cannot let your guard down.
That's right. Well,
It is Wednesday, September 13th here at America's Morning Headquarters, actually everywhere in America, and we are looking at Hurricane Lee and that long-awaited northerly turn. It's slowly taking it as it rounds the west side of our high pressure. It'll also pick up speed as it churns off the U.S. coast. The National Hurricane Center says watches could be posted today or tonight for New England. Even without landfall in the U.S., there will be significant coastal impacts, and we will cover all of them every step of the way here. More on the hurricane in less than 10 minutes. But first, the Northeast is dealing with weather problems even before Lee enters the picture. For that, we're going to head on into Jordan.
Yeah, we got this big low
6 dozen due to surf zone issues, rip current, high surf, that sort of thing. 6 dozen people. Really, really terrible. This is going to obviously continue to make those waves worse, the swells, as it gets closer to the coast. Cat 3 right now, moving northwest at 6 miles an hour, so it still has a little bit of a westerly jog, but it is going to make that turn. You don't have to worry in Florida. I know over the last week, everyone's like, are you sure it's going to make the turn? Are you sure it's going to? Yes, it's going to make the turn. I can promise you that. Tropical storm warnings here into Bermuda, because this is going to go, looks like just to the west of Bermuda, but it has a very large wind field. I mean, we're already seeing the winds, I should say the clouds from Bermuda, also going down here into the islands, some waves too, but look how far reaching the wind field is. Tropical storm force winds extending out 240 miles from the center, hurricane force winds out 100 miles from the center. So this thing has a huge radius when it comes to those winds. Wave heights already at 35 feet. And we expect that 20 to 40 foot waves as this goes up the coast. So here's our high. Remember, Lee is taking that turn right around this ridge. And so it's starting to make that with that northwest turn. Then we have our trough here. And what it's looking like now is this trough's going to pass on by, giving us an opening for Lee to potentially slam into New England. Not saying it's definitely going to make landfall into Maine, but it is definitely a possibility. Even if it goes over to Nova Scotia, remember, this thing has hurricane force winds out 200 miles from the center. Once it is up in this vicinity, it's going to get a different name. You might hear the name, oh, it's turning subtropical or extratropical, and that just means that it's not totally a tropical system, but it will still be bringing the power with it. Very strong winds and very heavy rain. And I know you look at this, you're like, okay, we're at 110, we're starting to slow down. When it gets up to us, about 60-mile-an-hour winds. Do not let your guard down, because it's going over the colder water, because it's going to run into some shear. A lot of times when these things get into the Northeast, they interact with other elements, other different weather systems, and the wind field is huge on them. So instead of a hurricane where you're dealing just with that eye wall, a lot more people can be affected when these things turn, extratropical or subtropical and interact with other systems. And then you get loads and loads of people, millions affected by the wind and rain associated with this. Millions will certainly be feeling that rip current risk. Remember, even an Olympic swimmer can't outswim that. The height of those waves are going to continue to get higher and higher, and this will also see that push of water on shore. And as we go through time, look at Bermuda and those tropical storm force winds. As this goes into New England, there is that potential that even onto the Cape, we have a good chance that we could see some of those tropical storm force winds. Molly, we could see major power outages here potentially if this continues as is.
A lot of trees.
Day after rain, and we have already saturated grounds. Boston to Portland over 8 inches above average for the year on rain. And then you have this tropical swirling mass headed our way. Let's talk about what's going to steer this and the potential of landfall in Maine. It is there. It exists. Remember, we said you can't rule it out. Going back last week, we were telling you can't rule it out, and now it might happen. Right now, we have a Category 3 hurricane looking ragged. It's very large. It's going to run into some shear. It's going to go over cooler water. That's going to take down the wind speed on this, but you still can't let your guard down, and I'll show you why. Tropical storm warnings here into Bermuda, and this system has a very expansive wind field, and it's going to keep expanding as it goes up the coast. So tropical storm force winds go out 241 miles. Hurricane force winds go out 100 miles from the center of this system. And again, that's going to get even bigger as this is transforming into what we're going to call either a subtropical system or extratropical system. The National Weather Service will give the name. It doesn't matter. The fact is, this is still going to have very strong winds, very strong waves, very heavy rainfall associated with it. They just give it a different name because it is not purely tropical anymore once it gets up into that latitude. So gusts here up to 50 miles an hour. That's away from the center of this system. And so that's one of the things you have to remember, is that you're going to get gusty winds that could take trees down here, far out from it. The wind also kicking up those waves, 20 to 40-foot waves as this goes up the coast, riding along the west side of this ridge, perhaps missing that first trough, and now giving a little entryway into Maine potentially. It is there. It exists. We are in the cone, and we will have to have a closer look and refine this forecast as we go over time. This cooler water will help take down some of those wind speeds. Notice here as it's coming in, we could have winds in between 60 and 80 miles an hour, so it still could be at Category 1 intensity. But when these get into the northern latitudes and interact with other systems, a lot of times they can be way worse because they get really big. And so that wind field can cause way more damage for way more people than we get just when you're looking at the center of that circulation. And watch the winds expand far from the center here as this continues to go north. And Jordan, it's not just about the system. It's interacting with a high, and the squeeze play between the two will also cause some very strong winds.
That's right.
Look at that thing.
It's
Woo!
Massive. It is massive. And
right?
Yeah.
They could really use all that rain. Coming up on this Hump Day edition of America's Morning Headquarters, Hurricane Lee, Other Wellness, presented by Physicians Mutual Insurance. And it's all about the rip currents and what we are going to be dealing with and what we are currently dealing with. You see that this is all compliments of Lee, which is well in the Atlantic, but it just pushes all those waves ashore this morning. We saw some people off the Carolina coast trying to catch some surf, but it will be dangerous, especially as this moves closer to the United States. So you have to keep that in mind. You always want to swim near a lifeguard, even if the rip current says low. You always want to say, I would say even if there isn't a rip current, it's always a good idea to swim near a lifeguard. Assume that they're present. If you're caught in one, it's always about staying calm. I know that's very hard to do when you're stressed out, but stay calm if you can. Let it take you out. A lot of people say yell for help. Don't panic. Just say, I need help type of a scenario. let it take you out, and then you can swim parallel for shore. But there you go, call for help if you are unable to swim or remain calm. It is Wednesday, September 13th. This is America's Morning Headquarters. Hurricane Lee is making that very slow turn around the western edge of our high pressure. Is going to pick up forward speed as it turns off the east coast of the U.S. The National Hurricane Center says watches could be posted today or tonight for New England. Even without landfall, the U.S., there could be significant impacts. But I'll tell you what, there is that potential that this could get shoved right into Maine, and it's something we're going to be watching very closely. More on the hurricane in less than 10 minutes. But first, the Northeast dealing with weather problems even before Lee. We could see flooding, and then this could enter the picture and make things worse, Jordan.
Right. And so just before.
Very much so. We want to now talk about Lee. It is churning in the Atlantic. Winds and large waves propagating out from the stretching storm, not only causing coastal hazards, but also major issues for ships.
Right. James Van Fleet is a marine meteorologist, and he's joining us live to talk about this. Thank you so much for being with us. And the big question we've kind of been curious about is how are these, let's say, cruise ships being rerouted due to Lee?
It's a tough one for you guys. And first off,
I know you're a meteorologist, but I know that you also know this industry like no other. You're the best of the best when it comes to this. In general, if there is a storm, do people get their money back if something gets canceled, or if they get sent somewhere else that they weren't planning on going? Is there anything you can get back?
Yes, I sure can. I can help a lot on this topic. So a couple of things time of the year.
All right. Good to know. We really appreciate it. Marine meteorologist James Van Fleet, we really appreciate the insight.
Yeah. I've never been on a cruise, but if I go on one, I want to be on the ship with him.
Yeah.
As best as possible. Right now, we still have a major hurricane category 3. This is the 8 a.m. advisory. The next advisory will come in at 11. We'll see what the hurricane hunters do with it at that time. It's trying to hold on, but it's looking a lot more ragged. Notice how wide this system is, too. It's huge. Clouds already impacting Bermuda for us. Tropical storm warnings. We could have advisories posted in the U.S. as we head tonight, maybe into tomorrow. And we will continue to see the wind field expand. Here's a look at the visible satellite. And notice we don't have, everything's kind of getting really torn apart at this point. Well, slowly it is, because we just don't have that nice, well-defined, symmetric system in the Atlantic for us here. And the visible satellite, you can't even really see straight down into that eye either. So that's an indication that it is starting to go through a weakening process, and it will continue to do so, mainly because it's so big, it'll run into shear and some cooler water. Tropical storm force winds going out over 200 miles, hurricane force winds out over 100 miles, and that is going to expand. Watch the wave heights on this thing as it goes up the coast, because right now 36 feet, and that's what we could see. 20 to 30 foot waves as this parallels the coast around the west edge of this high, perhaps missing this first trough that's giving us all the weather in the Northeast right now, leaving the door open for a U.S. landfall. And even if it doesn't make landfall in the U.S., maybe it's a little bit east here into Nova Scotia. Remember, this thing is getting big and big and bigger and bigger. And so the winds will still be affecting us here into New England. Looks like that'll happen as we head into the weekend. There's your cooler water. You can see the winds also going down, but don't let that fool you. I'll tell you what, you get a 60, 70 mile an hour extratropical system coming in that's this big, that's monstrous, you're going to have problems. You're going to have water rise, you're going to have wave issues, and you could get trees to come down as well. So this could be a major power outage issue for us. And don't forget, as it's coming up, you're going to get that onshore flow. So we could see major flooding here into the coast of Massachusetts for us. Before it gets to that, as it rides up the coast, rip current is going to be a huge issue. We've already lost over 6 people due to rip current in the U.S. this year. And the wave heights are going to get bigger, of course, as this nears the U.S. And we do have those tropical storm force winds affecting Bermuda for tomorrow. And then as we head really into our Friday night, into our Saturday morning is when we could start to feel it here into the Cape, and then points farther north as we head into our Saturday. But it is moving very quickly, so it will be in and out. But Saturday looks like the day we will feel the biggest impacts here into New England. And I just want to show you how that wind field is going to be expanding as we go over time, which means more coastal impacts and obviously more interior impacts, especially, Molly, if this thing goes right up into Maine.
And even well interior
In life, isn't it? And so, as you know, Molly was just alluding to, it could actually miss Lee and then leave the door open for this to make a U.S. landfall. Look how big this thing is. And it's coming around the western edge of a big high pressure, and it still has a little bit of a western tendency, but it is making that turn around the west side of the ridge. So let's get to what's steering this Category 3 hurricane. Winds at 115 miles an hour. We've really peaked out with our winds. They're going to start coming down mainly because this is such a large system. It can't really get its act together. We're going to have shear with it. It's going to be over some cooler water temperatures. So the winds will start to go down, but you cannot let your guard down. Because when these systems get into the northern latitudes, they tend to interact with other systems, and they're actually quite powerful and quite large, affecting a lot of people. The first being affected here on Bermuda with those tropical storm force winds, waves obviously propagating out from this system as well. There's a look at the visible satellites showing just how huge this system is and the bursts of convection, but we don't really have a well-defined eye anymore, and so we're going to continue to see those max wind speeds go down. Tropical storm force winds extending out over 200 miles from the center, hurricane force winds extending 100 miles from the center, and it's going to grow in size as it goes north. It's already kicking up those near 40-foot waves, and that's what we're going to see as it goes around the west side of this all along the east coast. You're going to have those big waves. This is that trough that Molly was alluding to. That scoots by and leaves a door open for a potential landfall here into Maine and being affected greatly through New England. And someone just tweeted me and said, so having a garage sale or yard sale southeastern Massachusetts on Saturday, probably not the best idea. I would say probably not the best idea with this coming in. And yes, you can see it going over the colder water and the wind's not as strong, but I can't emphasize enough. You're talking 60, 70, 80 mile an hour winds over a massive area. We have the potential to see a lot of trees down, a lot of power outages, a lot of issues. But you notice that a lot of these models are trending back towards the potential of a U.S. landfall on Saturday. Jordan.
Well, we know all the
Hump Day edition of America's Morning Headquarters. Why the dense tree canopy. It's Wednesday, September 13th. This is America's Morning Headquarters. Hurricane Lee is starting to make that slow turn around the west side of our high pressure Category 3 storm. Will pick up speed as it turns off the U.S. East Coast. But look at that. We could have a landfall in Maine. The National Hurricane Center says that watches could be posted today or tonight for New England. Even without a U.S. landfall, there will be significant impacts on the coast and even potentially inland because this thing is going to be huge. We're going to have more on this hurricane in less than 10 minutes. But first, the Northeast is already dealing with problems even before Lee enters the picture. Jordan has that story.
Yes, and of course, we've got
time for hurricanes. We've partnered with T-Mobile to bring you the science behind how hurricanes begin to help you stay connected and be prepared. Meteorologist Alex Wilson has more. Tomorrow we get a little bit of a break, and then as we head into the weekend, things are going to go downhill. Friday, especially into Saturday, all compliments of this Hurricane Lee, Category 3. Massive storm already bringing clouds to Bermuda. Tropical storm warnings have been posted for us. We could have advisories posted here for the U.S. as we head later today or perhaps even into tomorrow. The wind field with this thing is huge, and notice that you can't really distinguish an eye kind of right there, but this is going to start degrading as we head over time. We're going to lose that wind as it is such a huge structure getting sheared and going over cooler waters. That's going to kind of take down those maximum wind speeds. But I'll tell you this, our tropical storm force winds extending out 200 miles from the center, hurricane force winds over 100 miles from the center, and this wind field is going to get larger as this whole system rides up the East Coast and becomes extra tropical, maybe combining with another system, being affected by other systems. Waves 20 to 40 feet coming around the edge of our ridge, but it looks like this trough is not going to be able to pick it up and direct this away from shore, and that is going to leave the door open for a potential U.S. landfall with this. So we're going to watch it very closely as we head over the next couple of days. It goes over cold water, so you see those mile per hour drop. But I'll tell you what, when these get into northern latitudes, They expand out. A lot of times they combine sometimes with the jet, and they actually become very big and can impact a lot more people than, say, just the eye wall of a hurricane. So keep that in mind. When you're getting 80-mile-an-hour winds, so if this thing's coming in 60, 70-mile-an-hour winds and it's huge and it's combined with another, I mean, it can be very damaging. We could have a lot of trees down. We could have power outages, not to mention an onshore flow here into the Cape. That could cause flooding. We could see surge with that push of water as this thing comes ashore. Before it gets to the northeast, Molly, the entire East Coast is going to have to watch for life-threatening rip currents.
And that's going to be all this